Streaming.
And we're live.
Okay, and there goes my warnings. Hey, good morning, or good morning. Good evening, everybody. This is Capt Ron here with Dieter Staudinger, and I'm about to,
Well, I think we were thinking about having a guest from Portugal, so I guess for them it would have been good morning, but
yes, very
um,
early morning.
as it is, good evening and good night.
We do, we do have a couple of guests coming up in the next 2 weeks, and so look forward to that. We'll send out, we're getting better at sending out alerts ahead of time, thanks to Dieter, and we're glad to see you all. Tonight's another, of course, another episode of our Fearless Flight Live that we do every week. And tonight we've got a special show bringing everybody up to date on some of the latest in the news here. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get it underway. So Dieter will back me up and let me know if I am when I find the presentation. Okay, here we go. Okay, all good, Dieter?
Not quite, but maybe in a second. It's white. There we go. All right, take it away.
So, welcome everybody. Capt Ron here with Dieter Staudinger. As I said before, if you have a fear of flying or you know somebody who's afraid to fly, this is the place for you if you're trying to get over it. Or maybe you're just fascinated with airplanes and flying, or you like to keep up with what's in the news in aviation. You've come to the right place. And this is another episode of Fearless Flight. Gosh, we gotta be into the hundreds of episodes, don't you think, Peter?
Well, this is our 8th season, so and we were pretty consistent over those 8 years. Pretty much I'd say on average 50 shows. So
Yeah.
I think we have like 350, 400 shows. So if you ever get bored and wanna watch one of our previous episodes, they're all on YouTube because Facebook eliminates them after a while. So however, we do have the full archives on YouTube. So
And for many of you, you find us there. That's what I've been hearing anyway when I do 15-minute coaching calls with people. That's how I found us. And speaking of finding us, many of you have joined the Fearless Flight Birds of a Feather group. And if you haven't, there's no reason not to. The price is right. It's free, and it's a great place to go if you have questions or you just want to find somebody that understands what you're going through. Tonight, we're going to, I'll highlight the June. I should have made that July. That should say July up there. And matter of fact, I can do that. The July monthly group coaching webinar, it's going to be on July 17th. And we'll talk about it in just a minute. Got a special update on the Air India crash. I've been consulting with some of my friends still active in the industry and what they're hearing. And it's interesting, totally different from what I would have speculated and almost bought into when I first heard about it. And then, of course, if you have any questions, please bring them out, and Dieter will do his level best to raise them for us. So, okay. So on June or July 17th, that is the third Thursday this month, our next live monthly group coaching webinar is going to be Understanding Flight Anxiety. Why does flying scare us so much? We're going to work on unmasking flight anxiety for what it is. So if you're interested and you're actively working to get over your anxiety, we highly recommend that you come and join us. So, okay, so let's see what we know so far about this Air India crash. And it's the worst of being a pilot or being a fearful flyer, in that it's heartbreaking and not to mention scary for some of you out there. So when we look at the world of aviation, it's easy to see the incredible progress made in technology, training, and the safety protocols out there. And as I've said many times, flying today is safer than ever before in the history of aviation. But despite all these advancements, we know, which is evidenced by this crash, that sometimes unexpected and tragic events can still occur. And these moments test not only the aviation industry, but also our own ability to understand and cope with the realities of risk. And we've never understated the fact that there is risk involved in flying, but the reason it is the safest way to travel in the world is because of the success and the diligence we've had in managing the risk. It's normal to feel unsettled or fearful, especially when you hear about accidents like that. And you can imagine the number of calls and contacts to me about triples when something like this has happened. So I've had a number of people contact me with questions and things like that. And you're free to do that anytime. Contact me either by my text or my email, Capt Ron at FearlessFlight.com. We don't want you running around with questions on your mind that we can find answers for you. Our goal today is to take a look at what happened and again, emphasizing the rareness of it, despite the fact that it happened, and how every incident drives improvements that make flying safer for all of us. And this already will lead to some direct improvement in the industry. We'll talk about Air India's Boeing 787 crash in a way that hopefully will be accessible to you and comforting. And you might think that's kind of a weird thing to say, how it could comfort you, but hopefully we're going to put some distance between you and the anxiety that might have been triggered when you read about this. We'll talk about what happened and why it was extremely rare and unexpected failure, and what lessons are being learned to improve safety, even as we're talking about it tonight. So thanks for joining me today. I know that talking about accidents can be unsettling, especially if you're troubled by flight anxiety. And my goal is to share information about the Air India crash as I've come to understand it in a way that is clear, compassionate, and reassuring. We'll walk through what happened, why this was very rare, so rare, and unusual failure, not something typical or expected, and importantly, what the aviation industry is learning from this tragedy to keep flying safe. And with you, we'll explore the facts with kindness and understanding, and like I said, compassion, helping you gain a better perspective and confidence about air travel. So let's get started here. So the presentation is about this Air India Flight 171. It was a Boeing 787-8. It was flying out of Ahmedabad, I think is the way to pronounce it, to London Heathrow, about a little over 4,000 miles, so a little more than coast to coast in the United States here. And the incident happened shortly after takeoff. I mean shortly, very early in the flight. They got barely a mile away from the runway. And the takeoff and climb are important, but also well-monitored phases in aviation, with many of the safety systems we have activated for takeoff. And while this crash is tragic, it's important to remember that these events, again, are extremely rare. And I'm going to say that over and over again, because it doesn't seem like they're rare when we talk about this, and especially in view of the fact that we've had 3 crashes this year on a worldwide basis. We had a couple in the North American content, as you probably remember. And modern planes like the 787 are built with many layers of protection and redundancy to keep you safe during every moment that you're flying. And understanding what happened can reduce fear by showing you the reality behind the facts and the ongoing commitment to making flying safer every day. So what happened? Well, what wasn't obvious in the news and in the early videos that you saw was that they had a monsoon in progress, causing water to get into an electrical box that's responsible for engine control. So how does that happen, you ask? Well, underneath the cockpit of the airplane, there's what we call an E&E panel. It's electronics, and I forget what the second E stands for, but it's a place where they put a lot of the instruments that provide information about a variety of things that go on during a single flight. And it's normally waterproof. It's not pressurized like the cabin is, but it is waterproof. And what happened is, and you'll see from the timeline, is as soon as they rotated, well, backing up again, the monsoon rain caused the water just to inundate that airplane, and it found its way into the E&E compartment and created somewhat of a puddle in there, it sounds like. And so as soon as they rotated, the water sloshed back, and that's when the problem started. And the problem was it caused both engines to lose power because it flowed onto a relay, creating a short that had something very critical to do with the main engine fuel controls. And the plane was just lifting off, and unfortunately, without any power and no place to land, they stalled and crashed shortly after takeoff. Whoops. The 787 is designed with cutting edge technology and in controlling the engines. And unless you're a pilot, you probably couldn't even appreciate some of the sophistication that goes into jet engine maintenance and control. And unlike older aircraft, the 787 does not have a mechanical backup to override this system. So it is purely electronic. And therein lies that one of the initial findings is that they did not have the redundancy that it turns out that would have made a difference on this particular system. And the combination of the heavy rain and maintenance issue led to a failure that no one had ever seen before. And it was not a routine or expected flight problem, but a really novel malfunction. And the 787 relies heavily on something called the electronic engine controls. They have an acronym called FADEC, F-A-D-E-C, which stands for Full Authority Digital Electronic Control. And as I said, there's no mechanical backup with just cable linkage like we would normally have in a lot of other planes, so that when they lost the electricity, the supply to that FADEC, it caused them to lose control over the engines. And it was a combination of not only the water intruding into a relay that supplies power to that, but also some deferred maintenance. Pardon me. Some deferred maintenance in combination. And I didn't put the slide in here tonight, but we look at aviation and system or safety management systems as like layers of Swiss cheese, each with a unique placement of the holes in there. And symbolically, the fact that the holes don't line up unless a number of things goes wrong is philosophically how we prevent accidents happening in complex systems. And this, like other things, was one of those things when a number of holes lined up, and without any one of them happening, nothing like this would have happened. And it was not related to turbulence or pilot error, which is initially reported, or the more typical mechanical problems. So here's the timeline here. And I did another one because I think it's a little easier to see. So you can see 11 seconds after when the nose gear lifted off. So this is very early on. They're still, the main gear are still on the runway. They rotated, and the engine thrust immediately dropped from 92% to less than 27%, which is nowhere near enough to sustain a normal takeoff. And at 13 seconds, and at 16 seconds, just 3 seconds later, they started getting this array of warnings in the cockpit that you would get when you lose electrical and hydraulic power. So at 16 seconds, they got a master caution and engine failure warnings. They had 2 double engine failure warnings. And then just 4 seconds later, the autopilot disengaged. The flight controls went to direct mode, which means that it's not getting the sophisticated guidance that it normally gets. And the pitch peaked up at 18 degrees. Well, normal rotation for an airplane is 15 degrees. So that wasn't super extraordinary in and of itself, but it's something that you might expect if they had this kind of problem there. When it lifted off the ground, it started to stall at 186 feet. I think it got up to about just over 600 feet, and it went into a full stall, which is something that we never let happen in aviation. And when that happens, the nose then falls dramatically. And when I say fall, you don't get a sense of falling so much, but you can tell that you're in a steep dive. And I believe that I read that the nose actually went below 50 degrees, 50 degrees below the horizon, which is just uncanny. You never see that in a normal flight. And then at 38 seconds after they initiated the takeoff roll, the plane impacts the ground nose first. Just incredibly sad for people, and there are 243 lives lost, including the crew and infants. There was 1 survivor found in the tail section, and that's going to reinforce many of you who have read or heard or are old like me and heard for years that, if you're going to survive an airplane crash, the best place to be would be in the tail. And
actually, Ron, I think that guy sat in seat number 11.
Yeah, there was a disparity between that. The one thing that seems to be confirmed is he was near an emergency exit.
Yeah,
and for whatever reason, and oh my gosh, you gotta like his luck. He survived that, and I've not heard any interviews or anything with him as of yet.
we do have a question, Ron, here.
Yeah. Okay.
Somebody said you mentioned deferred maintenance. They read that maintenance was deferred multiple times, and the question is, would that also have happened in the US, or is that a unique Air India maintenance problem, or would in the US also be
We'll touch on this in more detail here in just a minute, but this could have happened anywhere. The combination, the tipping point, if you will, was the amount of precipitation that they encountered while they were waiting at the gate and as they were taxiing out. The rain quit, I guess, as they were rolling down the runway for takeoff. But what had happened was, for whatever reason, they had leaky seals, or in some way the water was so intense that it penetrated the normally waterproof seals that they have on the E&E compartment. That E&E compartment opens up, and it's interesting because I'm not sure on a 777 so much, but on other airplanes, on Boeing airplanes, there's a compartment underneath, and what you do is you turn some access handles on there, and then the thing moves up and inside out of your way. And so it's interesting that I'll be curious to see how the water got in there in the first place. But it was the pooling of water in there that when the airplane then rotated, get my little airplane out here. When the airplane then rotated, here's the E&E compartment up in the front of the airplane. When it rotated like that, you can see at the timing there at 16 seconds or so, then the water just sloshed back onto some of this FADC electronic component and shorted it out. And I'll touch in a minute. So the short answer to the question is, it could have happened anywhere, but it happened at this particular place, and it was due to the corrupted by all the rain there.
I guess the question, I'm reading in between the lines here, but I guess the question is, we're hearing deferred maintenance, which, for better or worse, that could mean cutting corners or whatever. And so,
right,
would it have happened in North America, that's the question, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about deferred maintenance. So when you see this coming up here, the things that happened immediately, anybody that had 787s out there immediately inspected for water damage on similar aircraft. So it would, and this is where we get into the wide range of follow-up in aviation. So it wouldn't have been just the 787. I'm sure that they probably looked at any other Boeing airplane that had an E&E compartment up there for things. Boeing issued a service bulletin to improve sealing and power redundancy in this particular case, and they're recommending training enhancements for pilots for handling rare electrical failures like this. And we'll touch on the futility that these pilots must have felt at the time. And of course, we know that there are ongoing investigations and audits to prevent recurrence. So Boeing responded quickly with safety directives, as I just said, on 787s for similar issues, and they're working on hardware improvements and better pilot training to eliminate or prevent this in the future. And here's what we're talking about. This crash was a highly unusual, extraordinary set of circumstances. And most flights never experience anything like this. And what made it so hard for the pilots was when the airplane rotated and they lost both engines at that point in time, believe it or not, part of the chaos that they experienced was all the warning systems going on. And it's safe to say that it wouldn't have mattered even if they had not been distracted or confused by anything. They would not have been able to restart both engines under the circumstances. So that's one of the things that we say is just such a tragedy. And I have a parallel in my own career. When I went through pilot training in the U.S. Air Force, on the fourth day of my training in a jet trainer, we had a midair collision during one of the periods of our flight this afternoon. And needless to say, everybody kind of reevaluated why they were there and whether they were serious about this or not. But it was an equally random set of circumstances like this. We had a midair collision in the traffic pattern, not anything like this, but it really, really points out how frustrating and helpless you can feel when something happens despite everyone's best efforts to keep everything safe. And that's part of the futility, I think, and part of the frustration that we all have when something happens like this. And despite this accident, and despite the accidents that have been in the news so notably this year, commercial aviation still, the overall safety will improve every year. And for anyone with flight anxiety, understanding this is going to help put risks in perspective. Nothing is going to take it away in this moment. But it's
Ron.
Yeah.
One more interesting question. Could the pilots have forced the nose down to prevent the stall, or did the computer override them? And I'm pretty sure I know the answer.
No, they had complete control over the airplane at that point. In fact, because the computers were all unpowered, and that was one of the problems. The problem with this airplane is the engines failed before the main landing gear got into the air. They were powerless. So if they had gotten airborne and they had gotten both engines to relight and accelerate to produce takeoff power, then it would have helped to lower the nose in the course of doing that. And they could, in fact, have prevented a stall. But the problem is they never had enough altitude to do that. If you have no power, and even if they had got them started and you're only at 400 feet and you need to lower the nose to 10 degrees, you're going to strike the ground before
you're already at the ground.
Yeah. You're going to strike the ground before you ever get the acceleration that you need to pull out of that. And that's what's so tragic there. I can't imagine what it was like. Dieter and I were talking about, he had read that the pilots appeared to have avoided a larger apartment building or something like that, Dieter. Yeah. And steered over. They did hit a medical college on the ground. And I saw the last fatality from the ground was there were up over 40, I believe. So there were 40 people killed on the ground as well. But when it would have been so tragic, and I can imagine the pilots, every accident I've ever read where the pilots had some kind of horrendous loss of control or inability to control to the level they needed. You most of the times they're working to fly it all the way to impact. And these guys obviously felt just a huge amount of deceleration when those engines quit working, and then to have no other alternative but to be in the air, and of course at that point in time they were well past their V1 speed, which would have allowed them to settle back to the runway and stop in the remaining runway. That was not an option either. So it's the worst case that you can imagine. And losing both engines on an airplane is just something that doesn't happen.
So can I just clarify that partially for myself and partially because somebody else asked that question. So it was actually the act of taking off, meaning the act of pointing the aircraft into the air, that made the water
exactly
swash back, and that caused the loss of power because the electrical equipment compartment there just
exactly
fried.
Imagine sitting in your car and you put just a bowl of water on your instrument panel there, and then you accelerate, and imagine you could lift your nose off the car. As soon as they lifted the nose, the water dumped, and it went right back on this critical component, which was electronic, and it shorted out. And that was one of the things I tried to do to make this maybe a little bit more unique than some of the other presentations you might see out on the internet about what I'm is generating some questions and images, because we're human beings are very powerful at creating images and feelings in there. And so I put some of these up here. How could both engines fail at the same time? And why did the pilots what did they do in those few seconds? Why couldn't they save the plane? We've touched on this, but we'll talk about it a little bit more. What does stalling really feel like? Is it like falling? How does the plane crash nose first? Why not glide or recover? And could this happen on my flight? And to some degree, I think Dee just pointed out, those are the questions that people want to know out there. Mm-hmm. So how could both engines quit at the same time? Well, when that happens, the first thing you suspect, until you hear anything else, is fuel contamination. In other words, we have a lot of countermeasures involved when we do maintenance on any of the engines on the airplane, down to and including different people have to work on different parts or on similar parts of the airplane. So I've used this for years. If you come in and the mechanics say, we're going to put a quart of oil in each one of your engines, one mechanic will do one side and another mechanic will do the other side, so that so that one mechanic, if he happened to make a mistake that could be critical, that he doesn't make the same mistake on both engines. So this is why it's so sad, beyond the number of fatalities here, that this happened, because we just go to such great lengths to make sure that we don't have a dual engine failure like that. And like I said, the most likely thing that you think about, if it really is a dual engine failure, is a contaminated fuel, and we have checks and balances for that. But in this case, it was a unique electrical malfunction that caused both engines to lose power simultaneously, and this is a situation almost never heard in commercial aviation. And of course, the most famous one in modern times was Sully, when they had bird strikes that wiped out both engines. And even that was rare, to have birds not only destroy an engine, but destroy both of them at the same time. The pilots in this case, the second question up there, what did the pilots do during those few seconds? They responded immediately to these warning systems. You may not be able to imagine, but if you look up in the cockpit, before we get the engine started, there's colored lights everywhere up there, and they all represent the warnings that you get when certain systems are not powered or not operating properly. And so the first thing that happened is they started to get the master cautions and all these warnings. And not only that, but they also got oral alarms to do that too. So you go from this normal, totally expected condition, and you rotate the nose, and all of a sudden the engines quit, and you get all these warning devices, and it would be very confusing. And so, had they been able to get the engines restarted, it still would have been very, very, very confusing for them to figure out what went on. And they did everything they could possibly to do that, but they just didn't have enough altitude to properly troubleshoot and recover. And and the next one is, why couldn't they save the plane? At a very low altitude, your options are limited. And when this plane lost thrust just after takeoff, leaving insufficient altitude, it didn't have the sufficient altitude to glide or to land safely. It's as simple as that. And the next thing is, what does a stall feel like? Well, it depends on how high the nose is when the airplane experiences a stall. And that's one of the most fundamental things that we do as pilots whenever we learn how to fly a different airplane, is we go out to a practice area or in a simulator, and we practice what it feels like as the airplane gets slower and slower and slower, and the air separates and the wing becomes inefficient, and the airplane settles. So the higher they nose, they had the airplane nose up 18 degrees, so they would have gotten a fairly substantial pitch over on the nose of the airplane. And that answers the next question, is when the plane pitched sharply downward without power and altitude, recovery is not only nearly impossible, but in this case, it was totally impossible. So that's why they ended up nose low. They were trying to glide, but there just simply was not enough altitude for them to do that. Okay, and just kind of a review again of all these things. It's highly unusual, once in a lifetime type failure. And modern aircraft have many layers of safety and redundancy, although the fix so far, one of the fixes is going to be adding a layer of redundancy to this FADC unit that became unpowered and disconnected from the ability to control the engines. Flying is still it says one, but it's really the safest mode of travel. There's nothing safer than flying because of the risks that we have successfully learned to manage. And lessons that we will learn and continue to learn will make flying even safer than this will be. Again, it's just such a tragedy. And so what can we take away from this? This accident highlights a new type of malfunction that caught the industry off guard. And that was, when you go to all electronic control like this, now the electric functions in the airplane become more and more possible, or more and more critical. When Orville and Wilbur first started to fly, believe it or not, they bent the wings actually to create differences in their angle of attack, and that's how they banked and turned the airplane. And then a guy named Curtis came along, and he said that's ridiculous. And you can imagine, if you're trying to fly a Boeing 777 and trying to bend the wings to make it turn and maneuver, it'd be ridiculous. So Curtis came along and he said, what if we make some of the control surfaces bend or pliable up there? And so that's what happened. So in those early airplanes, every control surface on the airplane was connected manually through a cable that ran into the cockpit and to the pilot's control column and the ailerons. But in this case, without electrical power, they did not have that control, in this case, over the engines. And for anybody out there, especially passengers and those with anxiety, you have to understand the rarity and the response to this event. And that in and of itself is, it might not feel like it now, but it can be reassuring. So we thank you for the questions that we've had, and thanks for coming this week and joining us once again to try to keep your fear at bay and find ways to overcome it. We just want to remind you that we've got a lot of resources and our Fearless Flight Birds of a Feather community that are dedicated to helping you feel safe and confident when you fly. And when I was thinking about that, I wanted to have a way to kind of sum all of this up. And when I go back to my own experience in pilot training, because we lost 3 of the 4 pilots when we had this accident in the first week of my training. And one of the hardest tasks in life, especially in aviation, is explaining why bad things like this happen. And despite all the advances in technology, training, and safety, sometimes tragedies occur, it challenges our understanding, and it really shakes our confidence. But it's through these difficult moments that aviation has learned and adapted, and it has improved such that it is the safest way to travel. I would never tell you that there will not be more accidents in the future, but I would tell you to observe that how infrequent they have become. And this is, it's be a memorable year because of the things that have happened, but it'll also be one that we will grow from. And every lesson that we learn out there helps make flying safer for everyone. And our role as passengers is to understand these facts that can help us find peace in times of uncertainty, because it's the uncertainty that plays on your mind and your self-confidence. And remember, your courage to face these fears and seek knowledge is a powerful step toward establishing the greater confidence that you need to fly. Remember, you need confidence that the airplane is going to be reliable and support you, and you need confidence that you are not going to suffer and be unable to manage your emotions. And keeping these things in mind, we can keep moving forward, and we'll be stronger, wiser, and better prepared for the future there. So I don't know if there's any.
Yeah, there's
okay.
one question, and we kind of you're sharing a different screen now. Maybe just end the share.
Oh, I forgot to end the share. Sorry.
Here.
Human factors.
Yeah. Yeah, human factors. We addressed the question earlier, but somebody was just asking, and so I just want to make sure that we're quickly pointing to it. Does the plane not have detectors for the water and flooding in that compartment? Sorry.
Oh, you get one of those dry spells.
Yeah. So the question, in case you couldn't hear me, are there no detectors for that kind of I guess not, or would they have not really helped because they contributed to all the alarms in the cockpit?
Yeah, if they had a detector, it wouldn't have mattered, but they don't have detectors because it's normally a waterproof compartment, and it's sealed off. It's not pressurized, so it's not airtight, but it is, it's just like, plumbing fixtures. We have gaskets and things like that. They're not pressurized, but they are waterproof. And so that was the thing. A little bit more detail on that was that there was a thing called deferred maintenance that was called to the attention of this accident, and they're putting some heat on Air India for that. And when they say deferred maintenance, they're not implying that they're cutting corners or taking shortcuts. Every airplane has a list called an MEL, minimum equipment list. And you can imagine that when you have an airplane, and this would be a simple example and not even relevant sometimes, but if I have 3 radio systems, communication systems on an airplane that I'm flying, and I'm going to fly over and one of them is inoperative, and I'm going to fly over the domestic part of the US, it would be okay for me to not have all 3 working. They would let me go with 1 inop, with the theory that I have 2 remaining and I have plenty of places that I could land if I needed to. However, when you're going over the water, that minimum equipment list changes because now they want you to have all 3 systems. And there are many, many systems like that. And how do they determine this minimum equipment list? One, it's authorized because if I have something and I'm in Sioux City, Iowa, with my airline or my airplane, and I only have maintenance to fix certain things back in Phoenix or in Dallas, Fort Worth, or something like that, then what the FAA has come up with is this minimum equipment list put together in conjunction with the manufacturer and the approved maintenance programs at each one of the airlines. And what it allows me to do then is it allows me to have a minor mechanical problem with the airplane, with a system that is part of my redundancy, and I don't need it to get back to Phoenix. So they'll let me go, and they won't let me run around with that inoperative for weeks and months at a time. Usually it's like a couple of days or 3 days at the most, and then I have to put it on for maintenance. So it was designed to keep us from getting stuck with an airplane at a place where we didn't have maintenance and get it back to a place where we did have maintenance. And so one of the things they looked at under this was part of this FADC, I believe that system there had some deferred maintenance on it. And even though it wasn't a factor in this particular case, it's like what we learned in Sully's accident. It's one of the things that came to our awareness, conscious awareness, and it will be now looked at throughout the industry. We'll take a look at how we determine what is necessary and what we can do without. So this MEL, you're going to hear that in the news probably, minimum equipment list, is going to come into play. But the main problem with this was they had water in a part of the airplane where water is not designed to be. You wouldn't take your circuit box at home and put it underwater because electricity and water just do not mix. And that's what happened with this. The water slushed back over into the back of the E&E compartment when the nose of the airplane raised on takeoff, and it shorted out the components to both engine fuel controls, and it caused both engines to shut down. And upon execution of that, and there's going to be a lot of talk about that, and you can bet that the journalists will be hot on that.
But that's also the reason, Ron, why you said earlier that this could have happened anywhere, because if that minimum equipment list is kind of like hashed out in conjunction with the manufacturer, you would at least hope that minimum equipment list would be similar to exactly the same anywhere on the planet, because if it's the same plane, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And what we're learning, the document that I had is out in the world now. And even though they're not supposed to be that many people accessing, these are from the two recorders, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. So this is how we know these things for facts, as opposed to the speculation that we were hearing just as little as a week ago, where we couldn't. And that's one of the things that I try not to get sucked into, but I did when it talked about possible pilot error, raising the flaps on takeoff or something like that. And of course it had nothing to do with that. So in the future, or well, the first directive that Boeing issued, which is an alert to anybody who flies not only the Boeing 787 but certainly the 787 in this case, was to do a moisture check in each of the E&E compartments. So that's the first thing you can bet, that those airplanes everywhere, as soon as they hit the ground, they went under some kind of scrutiny to make sure that there wasn't moisture in there of any sort. And again, what really made this accident possible was apparently this monsoon and the leakage into that E&E compartment up in the front of the airplane. Again, tragic. Oh my gosh, I can't imagine being a pilot and being up in the cockpit and knowing that nothing you can do is going to make a difference. So,
I'm just going to answer this one. It's just a one word answer. The question was there something wrong with the engines? And the answer is no.
No, other than they weren't working.
Well, yeah, they weren't working, but there was nothing wrong with the engines. They just didn't have the power.
And that's another part of the tragedy, to have an airplane that was otherwise fully operational, but it just got an incorrect signal to shut down. And that's all designed. And the shutdown came as part of a process to automatically cease engines operating when there was a problem on it with one or the other. And so it's really, really, really sad and frustrating. So, okay. Well, with that, we I hate to end on a down note, but this is what happens in life, and when it happens in airplanes, and you start with an anxiety about flying, it makes it even more difficult. But stick with us. Keep coming back. People are flying. I'm glad to hear from people that are. I got a lot of people I talked to this week that are flying tomorrow or Thursday. Happened to in this week. So keep the faith. Don't give up, and keep working on it, and keep coming back, and supporting us and supporting yourself at Fearless Flight Live. So,
all right, and have a good night, everybody. And Jerry, I just saw your question come in. We're gonna answer it next week. I'll make a note of it. All right. Okay.
And I think Jerry wrote, he's got at least one question that I saw coming into me directly. So I'll try to address that as well, Jerry. So,
but we won't.
All right.
Keep it.
Thanks, Dieter. Thanks to all of you out there. And thanks for watching us another episode of Fearless Flight Live.